Henri. Nope, we're good. I'll get this out of here. Ice cream?
They didn't get ice cream to sell, but still. I was expecting ice cream.
I don't say for you. I don't know if I can go there anymore.
Are you not recognizing?
Her hair was like, so I thought, you know, if it's a hole, right, I'll try.
You probably never watched episodes because that's from like our era. She looks like Pepis.
Yeah.
I was saying like Monsters Inc. You know, that little girl Boo.
Yeah.
Except she got 2 ponytails.
All right, I figured out, surprisingly, I had all the hardware to make this work as a camera, as a streaming camera. It was just, I forgot I had that little box. So, there we go. Not sure if it's better or worse, but I'm purple now.
bigger.
It's bigger and it's a lot crisper, so when we
In the
pan,
shop, it might not be fixed, but it's different.
it's different, it really is. We'll have to get the color gamut, because right now I'm kind of purple. I think it's these lights are messing with it, but, that's, you know what, maybe just give one a try.
We got some burnt out there now. This place is falling apart.
No, we purposely turned those out. Yeah, because I wanted to, when we projected on Good Friday.
Oh, I see.
Yep. So that was, Danny did it on purpose. Oh, other one. Yep,
Can I make another batch of coffee, Don?
better. Oh yeah, much better.
Would anybody have a second? You know what, leave them.
The second batch, excellent.
Can I just make a request?
Yes, you can.
I happened to talk to Danny this morning, and he was wondering if the guys tonight could move the top of the baptismal tank and move the drums.
That's right, that's right.
So if you guys wouldn't mind doing that.
It is heavy.
It is heavy, and
It
he
was-
would very much appreciate
It
it.
is well built.
Is there a plug in the bottom of that?
Pump it out, and then we hail it out, and then we mop it out.
It is a very labor-intensive job. All right, good evening. everyone, and welcome back to Bible study. After a bit of a break, we took kind of that Holy Week and a couple in there, so it is good to be back. So we're going to start with a refresher of where we were 3 weeks ago, I think, by now, and that is we are at the book of Galatians. So just a reminder, anybody, quick quiz, what was the situation, what was happening in Galatia?
Bad church.
Bad church. Why? Judaizers, good. And what were they saying? Exactly. They were saying not enough to be just Jesus, got to add a bunch of stuff. We were talking about this at Cheryl's today about bringing our past forward. You know, those of us, like one lady had a Catholic background, Mennonite, how much do we bring into the mix? And how much do we say, okay, this is what I got to do, this is what I don't got to do? And it was a great conversation. So Paul, this book is about how do you deal with the past and how do you live this new life? And I think all of us have a past of some level, and all of us bring our past forward, whether it was a liberal past, or as one put it that way mildly in our conversation, or a restrictive past, and we always move back and forth. So this is the issue. And they also were questioning Paul's authority, saying, hey, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell us what to do. You're not an apostle. We also probably all struggle with that. Remember that point when you said to your parent or to your teacher, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. And we all probably went through that at some point, right? Or we're listening to a teacher or reading going, you can't tell me what to do. So they're coming with that part. And then lastly, there was what's called libertarianism. That is a little too much liberty, because you could take things too far, right? So I'm free. Well, that means there was a church. Okay, what was the date on Sunday? It was April the...
Yep.
Then the one Easter before that was the 20th. So it was January, February, March, April. It was 420. And there was a church. You know what 420 is? It's the weed thing, right? There was a church in the States that did weed, W-E, like to see you. And in their video, the pastor rolls up in a black SUV with black windows, opens the door, and all the smoke comes billowing out. And he was kind of hotboxing, and I thought, I think you might have crossed a line there somewhere into the realm of bad. Yeah, a youth group maybe, but it was bad taste. And then of course people complained, and he swore at them. It was a curious church. So I think we can go too far sometimes, and that's what's happening to libertarians. So we've got these legalists, these libertarians, these people questioning Paul's authority, all rolled in. So if you look at the first page, you'll see just an outline. 1 to 10 is a prologue, and then 1:11 to 2:14, Paul defends his apostleship, and then he defends the gospel. Then he gives some practical applications, which we're looking for, and then just a summary. So basically, Galatians is grace defended, grace explained, grace applied. So why do we live and walk by grace? What is grace, and what does it mean? How far can you take it? And then how does grace work in our lives? Especially for those of us who grew up under law, this whole realm of grace. And those who grew up away from grace go, okay, grace actually has a checking effect as well. So freedom and balance. So we looked at last week, or 2 weeks ago, which also we looked at on Good Friday, Paul's gospel and the kind of 5 points of his gospel, and ultimately the sacrifice of Christ, the sinfulness of humanity, the sovereignty of the Father, the glory of God, and the confession of the saints. So that's all by way of refresh. Any questions, thoughts, and comments on that? That was quick, but you've already heard this, so this was just a reminder for those of us over a certain age. And those of you under, whose brains are filled with 15 other things anyways. Anyway, did we talk about that? Because I always think no. So I understand why we need to do this. All right, turn your Bibles to Galatians chapter 1. Let's read verses 6 through 10. Shelley, take it away. Galatians 1, 6 through 10.
I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Eventually, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to prevent the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned. As we have already said, So now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let him be eternally condemned.
I thought that was a whinnying horse. Is that it?
No, 10?
Yeah, all the way to 10.
And now I'm trying to win the approval of men or of God. Or am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ.
Good. All right. Anything jump off the page on first reading?
No, because I'm so far behind, I'm still trying to find.
Oh, you want to... Elena, could you...
Concentrate on two things at
No,
once.
Oh, really? Your brain can't focus on two things at once. You got it, Galatians?
I got it.
All right, excellent. Okay, anything as you heard it or read it jump off the page? Anything make you go, huh?
Well, you look at it and says, it's quite hard to say, if somebody says something other than what we have told you, it's wrong.
Yeah, that's
An audacious claim.
pretty brave, pretty brazen.
And that is still used in certain cultures, and in cultures that I've been in, where they
Yeah.
say, no, you stick to what you were taught, the Bible says so.
Yeah.
This is what we teach you.
Yeah,
But then you start applying, well, this is what we're taught, and it's not talking about, the gospel's talking about conduct.
other things, right?
Other things.
In addition
Also
to,
here it says, if they tell you something other than what we told you, it's wrong.
yeah. Because Paul's like, this is the gospel.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's going to work out what that gospel implies to them. But at this point, he says, it's not the application I'm landing on. He says, if you get this part wrong, you're wrong. And I think that's right. The gospel is so central, and he's already said it very, like this whole thing we did on Good Friday. That's the simplicity of the gospel. If we get Jesus wrong and the gospel wrong, it's like, when you lace your shoe up and you put the string to the wrong one, and by the time you get to the top, it's a mess. Or you wake up in the morning, put your sweater on, and you get the wrong button. By the time it's a mathematical principle. If you get the first component wrong, the rest, by the time you get to the bottom, the middle part may look good.
Compound errors.
Compound errors, exactly. So I want you to notice first thing in verse 6. There's no thanksgiving. Paul usually says, and I'm so grateful for the church. He says, no, I am amazed at how stupid you are. That is the first thing he says. But he doesn't say stupid. He says, I am amazed that you are what? Deserting the gospel. What's the word desert? And if it has two S's, that's the meal, because it leaves you wanting more. Mark taught me that. It just has one S. And what is desertion? Where's that word from?
Abandoning.
Abandoning, yeah. It's a good military word, right? To desert your post. To abandon the position you have been given. And so he just jumps in, he says, I am astonished. By the way, this verb is only found here and one other time in the New Testament. And what was happening is they were abandoning the gospel. And Paul uses, this is a great word because it's in the present tense. It means that they were in the process of turning away. It doesn't mean they completely had turned away yet. They were in the process. And when you see someone in the process of turning away, what do you want to do? It's still time. You can correct it. There's still an opportunity to restore them. They're not gone yet. And so Paul's quickly wanting to pull them back, and he wants to restore them to the true gospel before it's too late.
Like going to the dentist or the eye doctor before you're blind and have no teeth.
Yes, before the cataract has set in too late, you go, I think I'm going to get this looked at while it's still happening. Yeah. Or like when that side of on the truck, when the seam starts to rip, you want to sew it or catch it before the analogy falls apart there. But you catch it in process. All right. Then he uses this little phrase, him who has called you. What's the rest of the phrase? By the grace of Christ. By his grace. Who starts the gospel? Who initiates or takes the first step in the gospel? Christ. He's the one who calls you. Right? We respond, but the call starts with him. The gospel is Christ's initiative. So he's saying, it's not that you deserted my teaching. Who have you deserted? Christ himself. That's why Paul's in such a panic. Not because he says, I'm nothing compared to this message. He's concerned that they're running away from Jesus. And that's the deeper concern. They have deserted God's grace. God's grace wasn't enough, and they seem to be looking somewhere else. And here's where little words mean so much. He has called you, what's the word there? by. Not in grace or through grace, but the word by. That little word, forgive me, is called a locative of sphere. Is that a great term? The locative of sphere. It means the location of something. So, if you go to your home tonight, you're saying, I am in my house. That's the locative of sphere. This is the location by which something exists. So we are in the church right now. Well, this is the word, that means it's the atmosphere or the place. In other words, we're not called by works. We are in. Grace has been in. It's out of the sea of grace that God has called them. Why did God call them? Had they earned salvation? No. Was there anything special about them? No. It's as if God lives in a house of grace, and he opens the door and he yells, come home. He lives in this location of grace, and out of this overwhelming love that he has for us, he cries out of the house of. Now you think about people. People operate out of a house of. You ever meet somebody who operates out of a house of fear? Right. We can operate out of a house of want. We can operate out of a house of desire. We can operate out of all kinds of houses that we live in emotionally. But God operates out of what house? The house of grace, which is a great name for a church, by the way, the house of grace. If you ever wanted to change the name of Leader Alliance, I am voting for the house of grace. But it sounds like we should have really funky, and I should be wearing a man bun or something. Hi, welcome to the house of... No, I won't do that. Hi, welcome to the house of grace. It's a little bit that way. Kind of a cool name for a church. And we'll leave you to... We'll talk later. So, does that make sense? He says, you're running away from home. Don't leave the house of grace, because that's where God is calling you from. So, Paul's laying down this foundation. You were called from the household of grace. Why are you going back to the household of law? Or why are you living in the household of liberty, libertarianism, which is beyond liberty? And then he says, in the latter part of verse 6, for a different gospel. All right. Anything that is not from grace is a different gospel. What might be, use your imagination, what are some different gospels? Prosperity gospel. Good. Yes. Good. What else might be some different gospels?
Well, gospel of works, basically.
Gospel of works. Very good. Which is the one here. Yep. The gospel of no law at all. Just do whatever you want and God will forgive you. That's Romans' problems, right? What about the me gospel? You know, I was reading the story of David and Goliath, and I think I'm David, or I think, it's all about me, and it's all about, and that's the me gospel, right? Dylan already talked about the money gospel. There's sometimes the gospel of do, which is like, you got to work harder, you got to work, you got to do more, you got to do more, you got to do more. That's the gospel of a lot of people's lives. The gospel of anything goes might be another gospel. The gospel of pick yourself up by your own bootstraps and make it work. That's another gospel. The social gospel, just go do good. The power gospel, God's here to give you power. Remember the power team? The guys that ripped the phone books and inflated, so just like this phone book is your problem. Or this empty water bottle represents your empty soul. It's just so schmaltzy. That was the power gospel. Just we went to this one time, and out of curiosity, I looked up online. I learned ripping a phone book is a trick, and I can rip a phone book in half. Ethan, we can rip a phone book in half. Looks impressive, eh? So there was a trick to it. And then the signs and wonders gospel, right? The gold dust from heaven and all that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of gospels out there. And we have to be careful which gospel we hear. Because anything that's not the gospel of grace, we can quickly turn it into a gospel of law, right? Do. Or a gospel of work harder or that. So he says, anything else than this household of grace is that. Which is just, he says, verse 7, which is not just another account. He says, not just another gospel. Matter of fact, it's something even awful, worse. It's a lie. Verse 7. But there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel. And now we get to the heart of the books. This is his thesis statement. Somebody is in your church messing up the gospel. They mean to turn you around. They mean to transform the gospel into something other than what it was. They want to corrupt or pervert or reverse it. Woost adds this, that the desire of the false teachers was not merely to derange Paul's gospel of grace or to turn aside its true meaning. It was to transform it into something opposite to what it was originally, into something of an opposed nature. So that was the problem. This church is in serious risk of losing the... What happens if the church, if we lose the gospel? We lose the church. We lose the purpose of the church, right? We lose the good news, the hope of the church. If all we could offer people is work harder, what are we offering people, right? Or if we're offering them another set of laws, what difference, you know? Or if we offer a gospel that says, if you come to us, everything will be great. All your problems will go away, your money problems, your health problems. What are we offering them? Prosperity, yeah. We're offering them just bread, which Jesus said, you come to me because you want bread. And he points to the falseness of that. So this was the risk. And we know that they focused on three main false gospels. First, the necessity of circumcision, the keeping of special days, and dietary laws. So that's how they were reinterpreting the gospel. You have to do something, men have to do something physically, you have to keep these ceremonial laws, and you have to eat certain food or not eat certain food. So that was the risk. What are the risks today? Well, I kind of pointed some of those out, right? If it's the do, or the me, or the power, and we alter the gospel and we risk losing the good news.
The other thing that comes to my mind when you talk about grace, it's that grace is the biggest thing in our faith. Like, without grace, we're so royally pooped, it's not even funny, but yet grace is one of the biggest things that gets abused.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, it was grace, it's like, yeah, we need grace, but then there's, at the same time as I go, wow, I go, ugh, you hear the word grace, and it's been so abused that it almost is, it's almost a bad word in my mind. We're still so crazy.
Isn't that wild, hey?
Everything is grace. Oh, we know grace, it gets misused.
And that's in Romans actually.
Misapplied.
Yeah, Romans does that whole section, right? And Paul counters that. Where it's interesting, that's why we have to have the whole Bible. Because if we just read this, we would say, oh, it's just all grace. So we go, no, but Romans addresses the issue of the other side of.
If you take justice, it's all just justice.
That's right. And if you say, well, grace means I can do whatever I want, Paul says, how dare we say that? You know, grace, that I may sin even more so that grace may abound, right? So, yeah, you read the whole counsel of God's word, and that's where grace gets corrupted. And anything can be corrupted, right? So, take a look at verse 8. This is how critical Paul takes this line. He says, but even if we, me, or who? An angel from heaven. Well, we've had that in history. There was a man one time who got a message from heaven, and he found these tablets that had undecipherable Egyptian hieroglyphics on. So he claimed that he got two special glasses, seer stones, that he would put on his eyes, and he could translate all this text, and he wrote his own gospel. We know from history what he did was he stuck his head in a hat, and he just babbled, and he wrote down his own new gospel. But he claimed that an angel had come to him and given him a new message. And we have that today where people go, well, I was in heaven, and an angel told me this, and I literally saw, Jesus ride on a unicorn. You go, okay. This latest one was, I'm not going to say her name, but she said that there are happy dinosaurs in heaven, and they're not the mean kind. And she's awesome, which I would like to be true. I'd be good with that. But so we get these people who are saying, I had these angelic visitations. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached, they are to be accursed. That word is dedicated to God for destruction. This is not excommunication, getting kicked out of the church. This is a death sentence. Give them over to God that he might destroy them. It's a pretty harsh.
But he says it like that's a possibility, like an angel from heaven, or is it just like exaggeration proving a point?
Well, the Jews believe that angels gave them the law. So that's kind of why he's, yeah.
So it's more of an exaggeration than a...
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's exaggeration for the sake of making the point. Yeah. And the sad thing is people have said the same thing. They've taken that exaggeration and brought it into reality.
Right.
Which is tragic. So anybody who does that is in trouble.
Or even if Jesus came on a unicorn.
Exactly, yeah. If Jesus came on a unicorn, don't believe him. Well, maybe if it was Jesus on a unicorn, you should, actually. Maybe the white horse in Revelation is a unicorn.
Pegasus.
A Pegasus. I'd be good with either way. Or a dinosaur. Like a furry, winged, feathered dinosaur. That changes your whole...
But it's a horse.
It's still, and it says a horse, yeah. I have one of those paintings of Jesus holding a baby dinosaur. It's very good. It's really a good Jesus painting, but it's one of my favorites. He's holding a baby dinosaur. Doesn't matter. All right, before we move into blasphemy, he sums it up by jumping back. Verse 10 and verse 1 are the same verse. So, Joyce, could you read verse 1? And Dylan, could you read verse 10?
Verse 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul, an apostle, sent not from men, nor by man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead.
Okay, and verse 10, Dylan?
For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ.
Good. So in verse 1 he says, I am an apostle, a bondservant of Christ. And verse 10. So he jumps back there and he links his apostleship and his gospel. We're going to land on this pretty hard, but you cannot separate the man from the message, is Paul's point. And that's the verse Joyce read for us. Am I seeking favor of people or God? And the answer is God. I mean, yeah, he says, oh, that's what I'm not. Or am I striving to please people? That's called a rhetorical question because the answer is no. If I were trying to please people, I certainly wouldn't be a slave of Christ. So this is Paul's next counterpunch against the false teachers. He said, they were saying, Paul's preaching to please men. He says, that's not the case. I'm only trying to find favor in God. He says, if I was trying to please men, I'd still be a Pharisee, not a slave of Christ. Verses 11 through 17 is the next little section, and we are up to, Joni, up for 11 to 17? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this verse because it's so transparent. Well, whichever one you want. You do as you please.
For I would have you know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel which was preached by me is not of human invention. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Okay, just stop there. So what's Paul saying?
It is not of man.
It's not my gospel. Who gave him the gospel? Jesus. So Paul's claiming direct authority, right? That's why he says don't mess with the gospel. It's not mine. I heard it directly from Jesus. Okay, keep going, Joey. Verses 13 through 17.
For you have heard of my former way of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries,
You're doing great, Joey.
of my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. But when he who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus.
And Joey, you have come so far in the last few years. Your reading is excellent. I know there were some zingers in there.
That was all the big words.
Yeah. Let's give Joni the big words. All right. What's Paul doing? He's defending himself based on what?
His testimony.
His testimony, exactly. My testimony bears weight to the gospel. And he says, I once was what?
The best of the best.
The best of the best and the worst of the worst. He says, if this gospel means anything, it comes from a guy who hated it, who was trying to kill the people who are promoting it. So trust me, I know what it's like to be on the other side. He says, trust me, I know what it's like to be a Judaizer. I was listening to a comedian, and he said, Jew is a great noun, a terrible adjective. You can have a lawyer who is a Jew, but you can't have that Jew lawyer. That's good. It's a noun, not an adjective. So, Paul was a Jew, not a Jew Pharisee. He was a Pharisee who was a Jew. I often feel like I'm going, does it sound derogatory when we say the Jews? No, as long as it's a noun, you're good. It's when it shifts that you're bad. So Paul says, I was a Judaizer, and he uses that word to link himself there. And I used to persecute them, and I advanced in Judaism. He said, if anybody's going to pervert the gospel, it's going to be me. Beyond my contemporaries, beyond my countrymen, extremely zealous for our end. But when he who set me apart, in my mother's womb, called me how? Through what? Grace. That's God's house. Even when he called Paul, he yelled from the window of the house of grace, "O Paul, come home." He was to reveal his son to me so that I might preach it to the Gentiles. All right. It says, and I didn't go, there's a whole other story here, consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to the apostles, but I went away to Arabia. So we know that Paul spent a few years in the Arabian desert, and he actually met with Jesus. There's something that went on with Paul there, remarkably so. Because in Corinthians, about communion, he says, that which I received from the Lord, I also passed on to you. So Paul had some encounters that he never speaks about, but he makes a reference to here. All right. This is kind of where I want to pick up the last section. We might be done a little earlier tonight. Paul refuses to separate the man from the message, or the person from the message. His person, how does that change his message? Or what does it do to his message? How does it empower his message?
What makes it stronger?
Right, how? Good, you're right. How does his testimony make his message stronger?
It gives credence or weight to it.
Yeah, credibility, yeah. Because if anybody's going to be a Judaizer, it's going to be me, and I'm not. So if I'm not, then how can they be? Right? And that's why he has authority to speak to them. Now, let's say they were Roman Vestal virgins, that were bringing that into the church. Paul goes, I don't know anything about Vestal virgins. How can I speak to that? Right? But because he's speaking to issues he understands. So that gives him some authority, right? So when Dylan talks about airplanes, when we talk about radiology, I go, right? Because you have authority there. And so Paul speaks about Judaizers. They go, right, you have authority in this area. Okay, make sense? Which begs me where I want to land tonight is this whole issue of how do we deal with the person. I use man in message because it alliterates quite well, but when the person's life doesn't line up with the message. In 1 John that we looked at Shirley's, the takeaway from that entire epistle is that the things we think, the words we speak, and the things we do all have to line up. What happens if they don't? We call them hypocrites, right? So, we could do that in any profession. Harlan's a trucker, right? If he says, well, I know about trucking, and I'm a good trucker, and then crashes all the time, we go, maybe it doesn't line up so well, right? Or maybe he's a good driver, but he doesn't know the rules of the road. He doesn't have an understanding. We go, so it's all about, and that holy trinity of knowledge, speech, and words. And that's why Paul will in Romans say, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, lips, head, and get baptized, that's the whole trinity. So I want to walk you through tonight that we live in a very strange world. You've got a list that says the man and the message. I'm going to read these to you. This is the most recent list in the last few months of failures we've seen around us. Ready? Strap in. Apologist William Lane Craig last week denied original sin. He says, infants and mentally retarded aren't born sinful. So that the 90,000 member Southern Baptist Convention Church is accused of a hostile takeover by the leaderships. Basically, this church of 90,000 people, the pastor called a meeting, and 200 people showed up. And at the meeting, he said, well, that's who's here. And he took away all congregational voting rights. And he declared himself to be the sole owner of the church. He appointed his son as the new senior pastor. He took away every right to make those decisions and basically turned the church from congregational into his own dominion. And people said, well, you didn't call us. He said, I just called a meeting and whoever showed up, showed up. So that was staggering. Prosperity Pastor says Jesus hates poor people and Jesus never visited any poor person's house. Pastor asks congregants to bring extra underwear to church so he can bless their breasts and biscuits. Figure that one out. Baptist preacher says that he can't even look at Paul's contradictory verses. Go to hell, Paul. And I say, go to hell, Paul, about those slave verses. And I can say it to John MacArthur out there in California who said, what's wrong with slavery? And you got them Negro preachers out there believing that nonsense. I say, go to hell by the authority of Christ, because it's out of total alignment with Jesus. Go to hell, Paul. That was a tough Sunday. Charismatic prophetess says she's been targeted by real werewolves, hybrids, and shapeshifters. I had a werewolf who was a shape-shifting person. This is real, guys. This isn't just the movie. Snap out of it. This is real, okay? And this werewolf was on assignment to take out a bride of Satan. They were grooming her to be the bride of Satan that had been rescued from the cult. So the werewolf came as a punisher because a werewolf is an assassin. And I got in the way, and I was targeted by the same werewolf. It just gets weirder. Yeah, some things. Assembly of God pastor sentenced to 110 years in prison for possessing images. Pleads guilty to 11 counts. More details about Steve Lawson's double life revealed. Additional details are becoming known concerning adultery and his recent disqualifications of former Trinity Bible. Charismatic prophetess claims Loch Ness Monster will soon be discovered, signaling global economic collapse. Those are all in the last, since the beginning of the year. And then recently, this on a group called Protestia, they just track the news and they just give you links, so you can go to all of them. And so there's just a news gathering source, and then you click the link and it takes you to the source.
The number one, I believe that is.
Yeah, and then we've had this debate, but I don't. Yeah, we'll cross that bridge later, Joyce. But anyhow. That was the first thing on their website today. But I do love the werewolf one and the Loch Ness Monster. And a few years ago, in 2008, former pastor and Hillsong guest singer Michael, I'm not even going to try that, is back after years of flying under the radar following a 2008 admission that he faked a battle with cancer to distract from an obsession. So this guy, he would have an oxygen, what do you call that, cannula? A cannula, and he would have an oxygen bottle, and he said he had cancer, and he was going to the hospital, and he would give these fake emails from pastors, all because he was faking his addiction, and that was, he was trying to blind people with, and he wrote a song called My Healer, and he was singing it with his nasal of course he never had cancer. What's that? It is. All right, two more. This next one, right, and then of course Ravi Zacharias, which may be familiar with. He hid hundreds of pictures of women abused during marriages and had a rape allegation, plus had multiple affairs. Steve Lawson, who was a big-time guy in the States, 6 months ago was removed from ministry by his church. He released a public statement concerning the sinful relationship with a woman, not my wife. The next list is just in Texas in 2024. Just one state. Ready? Ethan, take it away.
Robert Morris, child abuse allegations. Youth pastor Luke Cunningham charged with assault of child. Ronald Goins of Koinonia Church charged with assault. Tony Camarota of Stonebriar Community Church let go for moral failure. Dallas pastor Tony Evans resigns over unnamed sin. Josiah Anthony of Cross Timbers Church resigns over inappropriate and hurtful. Taryn Dames, North Dallas Community Bible Fellowship in...
Wow. He was just kicked off for, I didn't do that, but same thing, immoral behavior.
Mike Buster, Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano.
Same thing.
Brian Copeland, Cross Timbers Church in Argyle. Scott Crenshaw, Lake Country Church. Craig Stone, Willwood Church of the Nazarene in Denton. Marvin Scales, Waxahachie, 50 years in prison.
Hey, I want to live in Waxahachie, Texas. Yeah.
Josh Howerton of Lake Point Church in Rockwell.
So all those other ones were all same thing, moral failure. That's Texas last year. So how do we deal with this? I want to give you one last issue. Before we do that, though,
That's the ones they know about, that's the ones that are
Yeah.
admitted.
exactly.
Because like even Robert Morris, my goodness, that's decades.
Exactly.
That's decades.
Exactly. So how do we deal with someone who professes to teach the gospel? Like Paul says, you can't separate the man from the message, right? John says, what you think, what you say, and how you live, all tie to the gospel. How do we then as Christians respond to such pages? And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Can I be brutally?
Yeah.
Can we respond brutally?
Can we respond? Well, 50 years in prison is brutal.
But you
Yeah.
look at it, and I think there is a difference between the we all make mistakes, but versus appropriating our mistakes or saying that, no, it's not actually a problem.
Right.
Where you'd say, yeah, I said something, and I should have said that, you repent, and it's dealt with. Making a mistake in a moment is not a disqualification of your testimony or your witness.
Because then we would all be disqualified, right?
What it is.
Yeah, we would all at some point be disqualified because of
For
something.
years, you're hiding sexual sin,
Yes.
especially as a leader in the church.
Yeah. Paul talks about lest I be disqualified, right? I think there are certain behaviors that disqualify you from ministry, but not from fellowship. So, let's say if the pastor does behavior that would disqualify him from the job, but they could still come to church, and that wouldn't disqualify them from fellowship. Is that fair?
Well, yes, because he needs that fellowship.
Exactly. And that's where Steve Lawson is disqualified from ministry because of his adulterous affair, which was ongoing for years, but he still is a part of a church, and he's undergoing counseling, and he's been genuinely repentant when you read what he's written. And he said, I didn't come out for the first 6 months because I wanted to know that I was genuinely repentant, that I wasn't just saying something quick to cover face. So I respect his process in doing this.
How does he sound so familiar?
I know.
Lawson was like huge. I forget which church it was, but he was like one of the big guns.
Well,
That
kind
name is
of.
so familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I must have heard
One or two.
So think about somebody like Ravi Zacharias, who maybe some of us know that name. And of course, so do we still read his books?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Do we watch his videos? Do we, what do you call it is it ghosting or gaslighting? What's gaslighting? I'm not hip enough to say these things.
Gaslighting, isn't that trying to avoid something that you don't like?
Okay.
Gaslighting is like stirring, we're making and stirring the pot.
Okay, no, so where we would just basically bury this person, right? Do we just say, okay, we're going to pull all the books off the shelf, throw them in the garbage, I'll never read them again?
Well, remember a few years ago when Hillsong was going through all their stuff and we debated, should we sing Hillsong songs? And
Yeah. So this guy wrote a great song called My Healer. Great song.
But can't you, the thing is, what it is in itself is probably okay. If the words are fine, it doesn't mean whatever his life is, but God might have inspired him to write that song, whatever.
Absolutely.
So if we feel it's right, like in words, I don't think we have to not sing it.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about Hillsong songs too.
I think it goes along the lines of supporting something. Like, it depends on what you're doing. Like, if, I don't know what you can say, every time we sing their songs, they get $100.
Right.
And if they stand for something that is like foundationally wrong. or
Right.
we
Yeah.
disagree, that'd be a compromise of our belief.
Right.
Yeah. And Hillsong promised to give back all the money that song had earned. Now, whether they've done it or not, I don't want to say, but they had promised they would refund and make it right.
Because even back in Bible times, some of the things, I know God inspired everything, but some of the things people said is still here. You still read it, you
Yeah.
still.
We still read the Psalms.
From it.
We
Yeah.
benefit from David, even though he was adulterous
Right.
and a murderer.
Yes, and you don't say, well, he doesn't mean anything,
Yeah.
like, you
Yeah.
can't judge. that
Exactly.
part,
We learn from both sides of it.
but-
Yeah. I think the temptation for us is to just throw them off and say, that's it. Right.
I think if somebody like, say, Ravi Zacharias said, here's the problem, sorry, but I'm gonna carry on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a different story than, but I mean, and I guess he
Well, it all came out
died-
after his death.
He died and then that'll happen, so that's
Yeah.
a little bit different.
That was a tough
But
one.
you know, like, if somebody says, I repent, I resign, I step down, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, you've done the right thing, even though it might be 2 decades late,
Yeah.
but you've done the right thing, rather than saying, but my sin's not a problem.
Right. The acknowledgement of is critical. Where David is repentant.
Yep.
And we learn from his repentance.
The repentance is the key part.
Yeah.
We will all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And forgiveness is the
Yeah, and there comes what we do have to forgive them. I think there's a point where you do disqualify yourself from the job, but not from faith.
Right.
And you're still a Christian, we still embrace you, but maybe there's a reason you shouldn't be a doctor, or, you know, if you've done something.
Your handshake.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like we think about any profession, I think there's probably a point where you lose your job, right? Professional standards, you know, whatever it is. If you do something, I suspect in your line of work, there's things that if you did, in any profession, right? You'd lose your work as a nurse if you, or in counseling, if you advise someone wrong. I'm not sure how the standards work, but I think you get disqualified from that profession, but not from being a caring human being. Okay. I want to leave you with the one that is closest to home and the most, maybe in this case, the most fascinating one. It's a guy named Brennan Manning. Brennan Manning is a favorite of many of my friends. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from him, and then I'll read you a little bit of his life story. That's a picture of Brennan. Brennan said this: "The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyles. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable." That sounds Pauline, doesn't it? And it sounds great, and he's right. But Brennan Manning sank into depression, gave in once more to his lifelong struggle with alcoholism, and suffered a broken shoulder and ribs from falls. He described standing before an audience to impart spiritual wisdom just before checking himself into a motel and drinking himself into a stupor. After several days on a bender, he would fly directly to his next speaking engagement. Brennan Manning's life story is the story of alcoholism. And he died as a consequences of alcoholism in his body. So, I mean, he would literally preach, people would come to Jesus, and he'd go back and get hammered. Get hammered, get on the plane, get drunk, do the next gig. And this was the life. You know, his wife left him, he was divorced because of alcoholism. I like what he said, the temptation of the age is to look good without being good. Well, he always looked good. But there were some deep demons in Brennan Manning's closet. He's the guy who wrote Ragamuffin Gospel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It was a musical and a book. I want to read you a little bit of a longer section from his book. "When I get honest, I admit I'm a bundle of paradoxes. I believe and I doubt. I hope and get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good. I feel guilty about feeling guilty. I'm trusting and suspicious. I'm honest and I still play games. Aristotle said I'm a rational animal. I'm an angel with an incredible capacity for beer." Probably one of the most honest phrases, and I suspect every one of us could say that, you know, that we're paradoxes. I believe and I doubt. I hope, I get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good, and I feel guilty about feeling guilty. Does that sound familiar at all to anybody? So Brennan has this incredible ability to speak to our hearts. "To live by grace means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am and what God's grace means. As Thomas Merton said, a saint is not someone who is good, but who experiences the goodness of God. The gospel of grace nullifies our adulation to televangelists, charismatic superstars, and local church heroes. It obliterates a two-class citizenship theory operative in many American churches. For grace proclaims the awesome truth that all is a gift, that all that is good is ours, not by right, but by sheer bounty of a gracious God. While there is much we may have earned, our degree, our salary, our home, a garden, a Miller Lite, and a good night's sleep, all this is possible only because we have been given so much. Life itself, eyes to see and hands to touch, a mind to shape ideas, and a heart to beat with love. We have we have been given God in our souls and Christ in our flesh. We have power to believe where others deny, to hope where others despair, to love where others is hurt. There is so much more. This and so much more is a sheer gift. It is not a reward from our faithfulness, our generous disposition, our heroic life of prayer. Even our fidelity is a gift. If we but turn to God, St. Augustine, that itself is a gift of God. My deepest awareness of my life is that I am deeply loved by Jesus Christ, and I have done nothing to earn it or deserve it. And I like Thomas Merton's line, a saint is not someone who is good, but who experiences the goodness of God. What do you think?
Well, it's kind of like that, who's that guy that you have played that video, that Scottish guy? And then they said, you know, why did you get to heaven?
Yeah.
Why did the guy, the thief on the cross, get to go to heaven?
Yeah.
And he says, because that guy said, I can come.
Yeah.
You know, like.
Because out of the house he called me.
Yeah, Alistair Begg.
Alistair Begg, yeah.
Like,
I think even in evangelicalism we have a sense of perfectionism. You know, well, you have to behave a certain way. And there's an element, I don't want to dismiss that.
Well, we still have standards, right?
Right, we still have standards and aspirations, but there is this internal struggle that we all have. And the beauty of Brennan is he brings it forward, and he's not denying it. And I think that's why people love him. His book I think it's All About Grace, or It's All Grace, is from where this is from. I remember reading it maybe 5 years ago. So how do we deal with these teachers, right? I think if they're unrepentant, but I think when we encounter people like Brennan Manning, I think we find a common grace and a common goodness.
I think the trick is to acknowledge it, but not to celebrate it.
Right, and Manning never celebrates. When you read him, he is so broken, and that brokenness that's why it just feels so authentic, right?
I think
That's why he needs Christ, because he is broken.
Yeah,
And he's not denying that his need for Christ.
yeah,
He's just denying, he's just saying he's hoping to grab him, but.
yeah. That's right. Like the man said, why are you in the hospital? He said, because I'm an alcoholic. She said, no, that's how you're dealing with your problems. That's not why you're here. That's a lousy coping, or an unsuccessful coping mechanism. Yeah. So, any thoughts? Paul says, I am I am what I am, which is Popeye. But I see in Manning what I don't see in these others. In Manning, I see a humility, a transparency, a brokenness, a calling out to grace, where others we often just see it as arrogance and an unrepentant heart.
But do you think alcoholism is different than always sexually?
I think so, sure. Yeah. I think this is his coping mechanism where, and that's where, we didn't go to 1 Corinthians, but Paul talks about these sexual sins are the ones that do disqualify you. That's the disqualifying one. Paul puts a button on that one. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. That's a good point.
They do seem to get categorized in the group of their own.
They are, yeah.
Even in prison.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I feel like an addiction, though, that, I think in a work kind of way, I feel like with addictions, that's God's way of bringing those people to him. Because if you know addicts who have, cleaned up, they cleaned up because they had become so humble and they need God. The
Yeah.
only way they can get clean and stay clean is God.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the only way for them to find him.
Yeah, I agree. And that's AA, right? We talk about you come to that broken point, and until you reach that broken point, you can't come to a place
Right,
of
you're just so humbled by that time that there's no more going down, you have nowhere to go but up, so.
Yeah.
So you take the next step. or whatever. So-
and you can feel that spirit here, that there's this brokenness, and recognizing that it's all grace. And that's why I'm such a champion of grace, because anything else is arrogance. If I think it's because I'm clever or whatever, right? Or because I'm so strong and I can. That's why Paul says, any of you who think you are strong, be careful lest you stumble. Because you too are vulnerable to it all. Yeah, pride. Exactly, Harlan. Yeah, and this just washes. Grace wipes pride out of the equation. Because there's no room for pride and grace. So I encourage you, if you want to read good, Brennan Manning's a good read. And I'll get the link to the book that, I think the book's titled All Grace, or it's just All of Grace, but that's from him. And he speaks to my, our honest struggles, right? The man had depression and didn't maybe make the best choices to cope with it, but ultimately
They
did.
always strove to do what's right in the eyes of the Lord in terms of for others'
Absolutely.
sake.
Yeah, and his brokenness has healed a lot of people, and that's the beauty of his story. Yeah. Good. All right, we'll wrap it up there and we'll continue on.